morning, everyone. How are you? I'm Nancy Watley. I am chair of the Terry Third Thursday Committee for the Alumni Relations Board here in Terry, and I'd like to welcome you this morning. I'm filling in for Dean Ayers, who is handling Honors Week responsibilities this week in Athens. So here I am to welcome you. This is a monthly event, as most of you know, and we do things here at the TEAC, as we call it, for not only alumni, but students, faculty, and this is where we all coordinate everything in Atlanta. So we're happy that you're here. There are 9 board members that actually work on this committee, so as you can imagine, trying to coordinate calendars with CEOs and executives in Atlanta and throughout the country is a little cumbersome sometimes. So we're happy when we have somebody as great as we do today. I would like to also thank our sponsors this morning. Our corporate sponsor is Bank of North Georgia, so if y'all would give a round of applause to Bank of North Georgia. And then we have 2 media sponsors, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and Public Broadcasting Atlanta, WABE. So another round of applause. Then I would like to announce some upcoming meetings. In May, our Terry Third Thursday speaker is Matt Stinchcomb. He is the managing partner of Seacrest Partners and a college football analyst with SEC Network. So come and hear everything he's got to say about next year's football team, how we're going to do so well. Hopefully he'll have something for us to learn about. And then on June 15th, we're going to have Nancy Juneau, who is also a Terry grad, owner and CEO of Juneau Construction, and had a lot of work up at the new SunTrust Park. So she'll have lots to tell us as well. So hope you'll come for those. We are off in July, so you get a week off in July. So today it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, and I don't want to talk too much about him because we're going to have a wonderful chat with him, but it's John Dwyer, and he's president of Cricket Wireless. Cricket Wireless is a U.S. prepaid wireless service provider, and it's a wholly owned subsidiary of AT&T. So I don't want to talk too much more about him because I'm going to ask him some questions. We're going to have just kind of like a, quote, fireside chat with John. So John, if we could get you to come on up.
Thanks, Nancy.
So, John, thanks for coming today.
It's great to be here.
And we're excited to have you, but why don't you tell us a little bit about why you are here and how you got asked to join us today.
Yeah, well, so I found out on Friday that unfortunately Glenn Lurie, who was originally going to be the speaker here today, my supervisor, got called to Dallas for a meeting. AT&T's headquartered in Dallas. And so he reached out to me and asked if I could fill in for him. So for those of you who thought you were coming to see Glenn, my apologies. I will do my best to fill in for him.
No, we're excited to have you. So tell us a little bit more about you, since I didn't do the whole bio. Tell us about you and how you got to where you are at Cricket.
Okay, so John Dwyer, I live actually just about a mile from here, so it was a really nice commute this morning. Originally from Chicago, I've been working for AT&T for 22 years. I am today the president of Cricket Wireless, been in that role for about a year and a half. Cricket is a prepaid carrier that was acquired by AT&T back in 2014 and is run as a wholly owned subsidiary of AT&T, and it's really a great business for us to run because we've got the benefit of being this aggressive sort of fighter brand inside of the wireless space, but we get the benefit of AT&T's fantastic wireless network and AT&T's balance sheet and just a deep pool of talent of people to draw upon from AT&T. And so we get to operate as this sort of nimble, aggressive carrier based here in Atlanta, but do it with an awful lot of adult supervision and support. So it's good.
So the industry's really changed. Tell us how you've navigated over your almost 25 years in the industry, how you've navigated that change and what you've seen and how you've learned from it.
Yeah, so the industry has changed dramatically. When I first came in, it was about 25 years ago, I started with Sprint, and the history of wireless, and I was in business school myself at the University of Chicago, and I wanted to get into a growth industry, and I thought wireless would be a great industry to get into. Now, I will tell you, I had no idea how critical wireless would become in everybody's life and what a crazy industry it would be. And there's actually an interesting story. There was when AT&T was broken up back at the end of the 80s, there was a consultant, and I won't name the consultant because I actually do a lot of work with them from time to time, that worked with AT&T and was trying to figure out how to divvy up the assets. And when they were looking at it, there was the long distance business, there was the local phone business, and then there was this little thing called wireless. And they actually advised AT&T to let the regional bell operating companies take the wireless business because it was just going to be a niche business. And it just gives you an idea that back then nobody really had this vision of how much wireless was going to change. And so over the last 25 to 30 years since wireless first really became a business, every 3 or 4 years things change. The technologies change, speeds, as we've launched data networks. First you launch a data network and then the speeds at which the data networks operate changes, battery life changes on devices, all sorts of things that have just made these devices more and more functional, more and more useful, more and more helpful. And so our chairman, Randall Stevenson, actually just talked about this recently, that even at his level, he views his own skill set as being obsolete every 2 years. And he's really pushed the organization in that vein to just accept that everything that you think about how you lead, how you operate, how the technology works, how you market, how you sell, in 2 years is going to be completely obsolete. It really does prove out. And so I think one of the things that he encourages all of us to do, and I firmly believe in, is to just take it upon yourself to keep reinventing yourself, keep in the middle of just reading and getting to know people who are working in different areas that might become relevant to your business.
So talk to us about that. Tell us how you as a leader in your company, how your management style has had to shift because of that. I mean, it's obviously a lot of disruption, and if every 2 years everything's changing, how are you changing?
Yeah, so I think first thing, inside the business, we were a monopoly phone company, is our history. And with that comes a certain style of leadership and management that if you were still leading that way today would be completely obsolete. I mean, you could not be successful, and it was entirely hierarchical. It was very bureaucratic in nature, and very much sort of focused on the financials and less focused on the customer. And so I actually, a couple jobs ago, was leading retail operations for AT&T's mobility organization at a time when we were in last place in customer satisfaction according to J.D. Power. And that was a moment.
How'd that feel?
It was, well, I vividly remember the day when Ralph De La Vega, who was our CEO at the time, called myself and my boss up and into his office and said, we need to turn this around, and I want you to get into first place before another award is given out. And that led to a real transfer. Yeah, which, by the way.
So why don't you tell us how you did that? That might be an interesting story.
And this is one of those moments where you have to pick your moments, and you're looking him in the eye, and he says that, and you have a choice of telling him that it is physically impossible to do that because for the next survey, 4 months of the 6 months in the survey period have already taken place, and so you literally cannot.
I don't think he cared, probably.
And so you look him in the eye and you go, "We got this, boss." And,
good answer. Good answer.
That's the only thing you can say. But we didn't have it for that period. But we turned it around, and actually, that was 8 years ago. It was about 3 years before we got to first place, and we just won our 8th J.D. Power award in a row. So the whole point there is, we went from a company that was very, very focused on financials and sort of internal metrics, and we turned it around. We used a program called the Net Promoter System. A guy named Fred Reichheld wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review back in 2004, and The Net Promoter System, if you're not familiar with it, is all based on one question. Fred calls it the ultimate question, which is how willing are you to recommend X to a friend or family member? And we embraced that and used that framework to drive a whole customer experience program that really both turned around the experience, but I think more importantly, it turned around the culture of the organization to become very focused on the customer. And what's interesting is then you take a layer below that, and you guys familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs? You know, this idea that you can't get anybody to care about things that are important to me unless you take care of what's important to them, and that starts with food and shelter and things like that. Well, if you think about that framework for customer experience, I can't get employees to care about our customers if they don't think we care about them. And so at the very base of this transformation was actually a program that we launched that was around employee engagement and figuring out what it was that motivated and inspired our employees. And we launched a program called Inspired and Engaged that was based on something that we saw at Dell Computers that basically says every manager is actually accountable to their employees, which in a company, an old school company like Bell South or AT&T, that's very backwards. No. It's a hierarchy. See how things work? Employees are accountable to the manager. Well, when you flip it around and you say actually the manager is accountable to the employees, and if a manager has employees that are saying I'm not inspired, I'm not engaged, then you get a new manager or you retrain that manager. And so that was a big part of the customer experience transformation, was actually driving this culture of employee experience. And we've moved that over to Cricket. Just last year, Cricket was named in the large company category one of the best places to work here in Atlanta. So we're very proud of that because we take that very seriously.
Congratulations. That's awesome. So I know you guys are part of AT&T. So what are some of the things that the values and all that you share with your parent company, and what are things that are very different, and how do you navigate that relationship?
Yeah, so at AT&T, I'd say first and foremost, it's an organization whose culture is rooted in maintaining in character. I'd say, in the telecommunications industry, there have been some, as in most industries, there have been some bad players out there where you've had companies that have done things that are on the edge of being unethical, some that have clearly been unethical, and some people are serving some jail time for that. Yeah.
I want to ask that question.
MCI.
I want to ask that question.
It's not a company anymore. So, and so the very foundation of Cricket, of AT&T, is this idea that character and transparency are something that we just won't compromise. After that, there still is an incredible focus, and I think appropriately so, on the numbers, on the financials, and on how you properly engineer a telecommunications network, on reliability, on things of that nature. And then where we start to diverge a little bit is that Cricket has been really challenged with being a disruptive brand out there and operating at a much faster pace and innovating much faster. And we're able to do that primarily because our value proposition and our business are just so much simpler than what you have on the AT&T side. We are a prepaid smartphone business, and in that we've got 4 rate plans. We've got a couple of things that you can buy on top of it, and we generally carry about 12 different phones, and that's our business. And that's been something that's been, frankly, a real blessing to have a business that is that simple, because it allows you to focus on moving fast and focus on the customer. Inside of the AT&T business, it is an extraordinary business, but if you go into an AT&T store, what you see is that the AT&T store is all about this integrated carrier model. And so inside of that store, you can buy service for business, you can buy service for consumers, you can buy prepaid service, you can buy connected watches, you can buy security systems for your home, you can buy satellite TV, you can buy UVerse TV, you can buy broadband service, you can buy home phone service. It's a lot of different things that you're managing inside of those four walls. And I think that's where the businesses are operated differently, because it is just fundamentally a different business.
So how do you make your culture and not AT&T's culture? I mean, how do you make Cricket Wireless its own company?
So the first part of it was to be at a different location. And so our headquarters are up at Lindbergh, right off of Sidney Marcus, and we've got our own building. And inside of that, we put a lot of energy towards defining what our culture is all about. And our culture at its core, for both our employees and our customers, is we use a term called something to smile about. And inside of the prepaid wireless industry, the history of it is that prepaid was built for customers who couldn't qualify for postpaid service. And it was generally a lower cost service. Sometimes way back it was actually a higher cost service, but if you couldn't pass credit, then you'd sign up for prepaid service, and the carriers would just give you what was sort of left over. So you got the phones that you bought were cheaper, but they were generally phones that were new 2 years ago. And the service that you got was less expensive, and the carriers, in essence, almost wanted you to feel grateful just for that. What we did is we had this idea that says, you know what, we've got to give customers a service that they deserve. And this idea of giving customers a service that they deserve evolved into this idea of something to smile about. And that when somebody came in and bought service from Cricket Wireless, that they would get treated with the same level of respect and get the same level of service that a customer who's with the AT&T postpaid side would get. And then as a culture, we rallied around that as something that was our identity, and that allowed us to build, really build this culture of something to smile about, being nimble, being lean, and just having a lot of fun while we're doing it.
So you've been the president now for about 1.5 years. What are you doing to carve out your customer niche and try and build your business that way?
Yes, so when we look at our customer niche, we think about it in two segments. And there's a lot of demographics and things like that underneath this, but there's value by need. And value by need is a segment of customers who either because they can't qualify for postpaid service or just because of the size of their paycheck have a necessity that they need wireless connectivity and they need to get the cheapest service that they can, the lowest cost service. And we serve that market very, very effectively with the offers that we have out there. And different from our competitors, we serve that market, like I said, with an experience level and a level of respect that they don't see from their competitors, from our competitors. On the other side, you get value by choice. And that is a lot of people who choose to go and find something that's a lower cost service. People who take a lot of pride in the fact that they get great value in the things that they buy. If you look at the millennial generation, it's actually part of the ethos of a segment of the millennial generation that they just don't want to pay more than they have to for things. And this idea of having something that's a good deal is, it's part of their identity, and they like it. And so I have a very deliberate strategy around serving that segment as well, and we're having a lot of success with it. And again, inside of this prepaid space, you see a lot of carriers that don't have a brand identity that millennial generation wants to attach themselves to, because they're very transactional. And I won't name them, but you guys see their commercials out there. Their ads are all about just a big picture about, here's what the phone costs, here's what the service costs. And instead, we've got these little characters, and we do a lot of things out in the community. We've got sponsorships that are a little more not what someone would expect. I mean, our most successful sponsorship in the market is actually WWE Wrestling, which is an unbelievable organization.
One of the largest moneymakers in sporting events in Atlanta in history. I mean,
yeah, and it's a really neat organization, and I just became involved with it, and I've gotten to know people at WWE, And the first thing that you ask is, you go, do people, like everybody knows this isn't real, right?
What? It's not real?
Well, but you have to ask that question, because why would somebody pay $100 for a ticket to go to an event? But then you get into it, and it's all about entertainment, and it's really just a really neat thing. Well, you attach our brand to WWE wrestling, and it has been fantastic. There's actually a video that we did. So John Cena is the biggest star. And if you go on YouTube or Google John Cena cricket, you'll see a video that we had that was one of the most successful videos on all of YouTube last year. And all we did is we brought John Cena into a cricket store, and we told a bunch of WWE fans that they might have an opportunity to introduce John Cena, and then John Cena's actually there and he pops out and you see their reaction. Kind of a simple idea. Has absolutely nothing to do with prepaid. It's all about giving people something to smile about. And I mean, this was, the total number of views of this thing was almost 100 million views. Think about that.
Wow.
And but it's just a very non-traditional way for us to think about engaging the brand and building something that gives people something to smile about.
So it's funny how many kids get their parents into that WWE.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So let's switch gears a little bit. Talk to us a little bit more about your leadership style, and then how do you encourage leadership among your people? Let's start with your style first.
Okay. All right. So my style, number one, I am very much into the details. And it's funny. I saw Nancy Berger is here. Nancy used to work for me, and she can tell me if I'm right or wrong about this stuff. I like being into the details, and it's always been kind of the way that I like to the way that I like to operate, because so much of what happens, if you're not in the details, you allow people to kind of skim over the stuff that might go wrong. And now, obviously, when you're president of a company that now has over 8 million customers and operates in 50 states, I can't be in all the details all the time, but you kind of pick your moments of where you're going to go deep. And Jack Welch has this idea when he talks about his management style of this idea of doing deep dives. You kind of skim along, and your intuition will tell you when there's a moment that you need to start probing deep. And when that happens, I'll just start asking questions and get right down into the front lines. I also spend a lot of time in front of customers. This work that I've done in the customer experience space gave me a real appreciation for this idea that when you've got 4 or 5 layers of management inside the organization, the one that's most important is the one that sits right in front of the customer. And that, for me, that's a real way that I drive accountability, is spending time with those folks, spending time with our customers, and then coming back to my leadership team and holding them accountable for what I've learned in those experiences. And so it's hard. I mean, your day can fill up like air fills a room. It fills up with meetings. It fills up with important stuff that'll cause you to never leave the headquarters building. And the reality is that if you do that too much, you really lose what's important. I think the last piece is that I manage by the numbers. I'm a numbers guy by nature, and I strongly believe that there is, that the ability for somebody to anytime they're asking for resources or anytime they're trying to solve a problem, to frame it around numbers, around whether it's customer satisfaction, operating income impact, whatever it is. That's one of the things that I really look for when I'm, promoting and developing people inside of my organization, because too often people will go down the wrong path when they just say, well, this feels right. It's a great place to start, but as soon as you get it feels right, the next thing that you've got to do is start putting data behind it and say, is it going to make a difference? If I fix this problem and I fix it in this way, is it going to create value for the corporation, and is it going to make a big enough impact to really warrant our attention right now?
There's probably some Terry people in here that appreciate all that numbers talk. That's a thing. So how do you encourage leadership in your organization? How do you encourage people to want to be more than they are and to be stronger leaders, not necessarily with a title?
So I think the biggest thing that I've learned over time is to really challenge people. And this has happened with me. I mentioned Ralph De La Vega, and when he asked me to take what was the last place customer satisfaction brand in the telecommunications industry and make it first place, in my mind, I thought, I don't know that we can do that. Actually, the AT&T brand had never been in first place in the history of the wireless industry. And I don't know what was going on inside of his head, but he looked me in the eye and he said, "You're going to get this done." Big, hairy, audacious goals is what you hear it called sometimes. And I think that's important, is to put goals in front of people and challenge them to be more than they think they can be. I think the second thing is to really celebrate success. It's so easy in the course of the day to find lots of challenges and lots of problems, but when there are milestones that we achieve along the way of getting any project done, that you need to pause and thank people and celebrate those, because what you find is that if you go to the model that I have for employee engagement, what people really want is they want to be recognized for making a meaningful contribution to a winning team. Those are the three things that they really care about. So number one, they want to be recognized. They want to know that what they do actually makes a difference, and they want to believe that what they're working on actually is accomplishing something, winning team. And we've all had jobs and had assignments and had projects where this idea of making your project or your organization thought of as a winning team is hard. And the reality is that you got to spend a lot of time digging in to figure out how are you going to reframe the problem to make what you're doing part of a winning team, even if you're last in the standings. And so sometimes that's about incremental improvement. Sometimes it's about chunking it up into parts of the task and making each of those something that's winning. Sometimes it's about internal competition, but you got to figure out how to get people inspired. And when that happens, they accomplish extraordinary things.
Fabulous. I'm writing down stuff I can't tweet right now, so I'm going to have to tweet this later. So I know we have some MBA students in the room, and I know you have that in your past as well. What's the best piece of advice that you got that you could share with our students here as well as the rest of us?
Yeah, so I was actually just back in Chicago, where I went to business school just a few months ago, and I was asked that question. And there was the very first day of business school, the dean actually said something that stuck with me for a long time, and he said, you're going to learn a lot of very specific skills. You're going to learn how to create a balance sheet, how to do cost accounting. You're going to learn the 4 P's of marketing. You're going to learn all these things. But the most important thing that you've got to understand you're going to learn is you're going to learn how to learn. And I think that is something that really stuck with me, because in the course of a business school curriculum, you get thrown into a lot of areas where you're uncomfortable and where you're not, where you don't have experience. And what you've got to be able to do is figure out how to break that down into just problem solving and into critical thinking skills and into learning how to ask the right questions and get the task done using whatever framework you choose to use. And so for me, that was the biggest part of business school, was learning how to learn. And through that, what I found is that I could use those skills when I got thrown into a job where I was completely unfamiliar. Customer service was the first one. The first time that I ever worked in customer service, I walked into a call center that had 1,100 employees back in 1999, and they all worked for me. And I mean, literally, I'd never even been into a call center, and all of a sudden I'm in charge of this big organization. And I kind of fell back to what I learned in business school, which was, let's start with the number one question: what problem are we trying to solve here? And then you could start to break that down into then how are we going to solve it? what tasks need to get done, who's going to get them done, and when are they due. And all of a sudden, it doesn't matter what the fact that I didn't know anything about customer service. You just got to fall back to that framework.
Oh, I totally agree. Learn how to learn.
Yeah.
I mean, we're always learning something, that's for sure. So I noticed, I was doing a little research, I noticed on your LinkedIn that you talk a lot about simplifying. So tell us how that works into your life and into your management style and how it works into Cricket. And
Yeah, so simplification, so I'll start with Cricket. Out of necessity, because we acquired this company and then we expanded just massively in a short period of time. A big thing that we were really trying to accomplish was you couldn't expand the way that we needed to if there was complexity in the business. And so just out of necessity, we had to keep it simple. That, as I mentioned earlier, proved to be a real asset for us. And one of the things that we do as just a discipline inside of the business is for everything that we start, we find something that we're going to kill. Something that we launched a while ago that just we've decided it doesn't work anymore and we're just going to get out of it. And that's hard. It's really hard. And what I find is more often than not, it's not hard so much from the business standpoint, it's hard from the people standpoint, because people have a pride and ownership that they launched something or that they're responsible for something. We literally have one service that I was just going through this last week that has 26 customers. Now, in a business with 8 million customers, to have a service that has 26 customers, that one should be really easy. We just need to put a bullet in it, end that service, and move on. And yet, in the course of the conversation, you can immediately see the hurt feelings of, I remember when we launched that.
that was my baby.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's having a discipline of actually doing that and engaging in that hard conversation as something that you do very intentionally, because if you don't do it intentionally, then you just let different policies and processes build up like sort of plaque on in whatever. And then in my personal life, it ends up being out of necessity. You've got to make decisions. I think this is also a Jack Welch quote. It is Jack Welch about balance. He says, "There's no such thing as work-life balance. There are decisions, and those decisions have consequences." And I think it's a really interesting way to think about that. And in particular, when you look at him, he's a fantastic leader, and I love a lot of what he writes. But actually, if you look at his life, he's on his third marriage now, and he's made a lot of choices. And I think when you hear him speak, he kind of understands the choices that he's made, and that in the course of decisions that you make, sometimes there are negative consequences for your personal life and for other things, and you've just got to make those choices yourself and decide what's important to you. And I think that's, if you do that, and once again you make it intentional, then you can make room for whatever you want.
So that leads to the next question is, also on your LinkedIn, it talks about you finding your passion and loving what you do. Talk to us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, for me, the passion that I have really is much more around developing people. I love putting points on the board as a business leader is always fun. Just hitting your sales goals, hitting your profit goals, doing those things is a lot of fun. But for me, the thing that I actually get the most passion out of is developing my team and watching great leaders develop their skills, get challenged, rise to the occasion, and get recognized for that. And so that's just been a lot of fun for me. Also, inside of the Atlanta community, I've been blessed. Our company we're involved with a lot of different organizations. I was talking with Jim Breedlove back here. He and I got to know each other through the Boy Scouts. My son was an Eagle Scout, and I couldn't put up a tent if you put a gun to my head right now. But
Don't tell Tracy Tech all that.
Yeah, well, Tracy knows it, and so that's why he and Jim put me to work on fundraising.
I might need to talk to you just a little bit.
Don't need to put a tent up if you're fundraising. And so I've been working on fundraising for the Boy Scouts and on the board of directors for about 6-7 years. Junior Achievement. I'm actually the chairman of the board for Junior Achievement, and that's an organization that I am just
Fabulous
extraordinarily passionate about. And I have this opportunity because AT&T encourages that among employees and supports that, to spend a lot of time working with Jack Harris, the CEO there, and helping the community.
I am a firm believer in community involvement, and I think that you can only get better by knowing more people and connecting people and using those relationships. So, okay, I've asked a lot of questions, and I know you guys would love to talk to John here. So we would love to have you ask questions, but wait on a microphone because we're recording. I couldn't think of the word. Recording. It's a big word, long word.
I didn't know we were recording this.
Yeah.
I might have thought about my answers a little bit.
No, you did beautifully. You did beautifully. And I know a lot of folks in here will take it with them. So, questions? Yep.
John, this is another question about leadership. You have worked for some great leaders in your career. Ralph De La Vega was a legend. But there was a study that came out this week that said introverts make the best CEOs, which got a lot of people by surprise. Talk about characteristics of top leaders that you have seen and what you admire.
Yeah, what's fascinating. So number one, I'm an introvert.
No way.
Yeah, I'm a profound introvert. If you buy the Myers-Briggs scale, and for those of you who aren't familiar with Myers-Briggs, the introvert-extrovert continuum is really based on where you get your energy. And for me, when I have a big problem or something like that, I go close my door and I need to think by myself. And when I'm tired, when it's time for me to go re-energize, I do it by myself. I don't go surround myself with people. And an extrovert gets all their energy from other people. Nancy Berger over here is an extrovert, no doubt about it. And so, I mean, for me, I spend a lot of time thinking about this, and I like to share with people when I talk to them in forums like this, that as an introvert, you actually can become successful, but you just need to be thoughtful about how you do it. So as an introvert, speaking in front of groups of people like this is not natural, and usually, and earlier in your career, it's very uncomfortable. And so what do? You just do it over and over and over again, and you focus on the task. The task of, way back, it was I needed to communicate something, I needed to inspire a group of people, I needed to rally the troops, I needed to fill in the blank, whatever it is. Focus on that, and then speaking to a group of people is just a means to an end. It's not something that I was actually looking forward to. But if what's important to me is the task, getting that done, then you figure out how to speak in front of a group of people and be comfortable with it. I think that anybody, any personality type can be successful as a senior leader in an organization. But what you need to do is, number one, character can't be compromised. I think that just regardless, if you are someone who your team, your supervisor questions your character, then your ability to get people to invest in you or to follow you when you really need them just won't happen. After that, the key is you need to figure out how to surround yourself with the right people. So if you're not a numbers person, then you've got to find numbers people who are going to challenge you, who are going to push you, who are going to do that kind of work for you. If you're not a sales leader, then you got to find the right sales leader. And so you just have to fill in around yourself with the right kind of skills.
So John, you were talking earlier about the Net Promoter, and I guess the goal was to get that customer to recommend the service. And be curious to hear either some of the challenges or how you prepare your customer service people, because if I think of wireless, it's the service, it's the hardware, it's the network, the dead spots, and there's all these things that are not necessarily in their control, and yet you've got a end user error. I mean, we're all perfect. We don't make mistakes with our phones or our technology. So
yeah.
Just be curious to hear what y'all have done kind of as an overall level, and then to prepare your customer service to deal with something. Well, did you turn it on, or did you,
Yeah.
that kind of thing?
So a couple things with that. One, we stole ideas from a couple different companies. One was Ritz-Carlton, and so there's a guy named Horst Schulze who actually lives in the Atlanta area. He was the original CEO of the Ritz-Carlton. And everybody at the Ritz-Carlton walks around with this trifold card. And inside of there is a very simple description of the Ritz-Carlton expectations of their employees. And they have a ritual every morning before any hotel opens where they actually bring everybody together and they do a huddle and they talk about one of 21 items on that list and what it means to them and how they're going to bring it to life today. And so in doing that, they really bring a culture of making sure that people really understand how important this is, and it goes all the way to the top of the organization. The second one, Starbucks has a book that every new employee gets called the Green Apron book. And that basically talks about the culture. And so we created something called Our Promise. And Our Promise was a book that we created, really, really simple thing that was around 5 key behaviors. Give the customer a warm, friendly greeting, use the customer's name, provide undivided attention, thank them for their business. Really simple, observable, coachable behaviors. And in the context of everything else that's going on and all the complexity that you just described, what we came to realize was if you can get those 5 behaviors right, the customer is going to be satisfied. You may not even solve their problem, but they're going to feel like you cared. So that was a really key foundation. Then the second part gets into the numbers, which is you start working through building histograms of how many calls come in, what's the reason for the call, what's the satisfaction with that specific call, and then you journey map what they're going through and what the root cause of the problems is, and you pick them off one at a time. And what you find when you do that, and it gets to this idea of me really focusing on employees that embrace this idea of using the numbers, is the most emotionally taxing kinds of events that people end up talking about very often are very, very low frequency. And so if you focus on the ones that are really the big hitters in the histogram, and you get those just 20, 30% better than they otherwise would be, that's when you really start getting things working well. And you kind of get this flywheel turning where you get 1 or 2 call types working well. You see some progress happen over the course of a couple of months, and people get excited by this. You celebrate the wins along the way, and all of a sudden, this idea of employees feeling like they're making a meaningful contribution to a winning team, they go, wow, in 15 years, I've never seen us make that progress. When it comes down to it, it's not that complicated as long as you get people focused on the right stuff. And so that was the other part of it. So 1, small number of coachable, observable behaviors that define the culture, and then 2, disciplined quantitative analysis to say which 3 things, if we fix them this year, are going to make the biggest difference, and then just work like hell on those 3 things.
Hi, I'm over here, Nancy.
Oh.
Thank you for this morning. You mentioned that when you were in front of Ralph, and he said that he wanted to be number 1 by the end of the year, and in your head you knew it was impossible, but you said yes anyway. And you said then that it took 3 years. What was your process in knowing in your head it wasn't achievable, but keeping him up to date throughout that process as to, we're not there yet, but as reporting to him, making him comfortable with, we didn't achieve it yet, but this is where we're going?
Yeah, so the first thing that I did is we broke down the customer experience drivers into what the drivers were. And I said, okay, Ralph, if you're really serious about this, about turning this thing around immediately, let me give you some choices. And you can imagine with a wireless service, the 2 things that we could do at that time was 1, staff up our stores so that there was no wait time and everybody had plenty of time, and staff up our call centers. And so here's what that would cost. The second thing is that we could cut our prices. Now, you basically laid out a plan that said, Ralph, I heard what you asked me to do, and I don't recommend this, but here's how we could get it done. And he looked at it, and it destroyed about $2 billion of value in the corporation. But it was going to drive customer experience. And I said, so this is the shortest path between where we are and a great customer experience. Then I gave him the alternative that says, now if we want to do this the hard way, here's what the roadmap looks like. And here's what I would go focus on first and second and third. Here's the resources that I need. Here's the goals that I'll commit to, and you can hold me accountable to them. And then that started a series of monthly meetings of sitting down with him that, I'm not in that role anymore, but those meetings continue today, actually at our chairman's table, reviewing NPS scores at every business unit inside of AT&T and talking about the drivers and the actions that are going on.
And John, I guess I have the next question. So personally, I'm currently back getting my MBA at the University of Georgia, so we do have, I guess, business school and those aspirations in common. But I spent my first 7 years in the sports and entertainment sponsorships and marketing industry, so was curious to hear from someone in your seat how you go about evaluating sponsorships, whether it's potential partnerships or also the effectiveness of deals like the WWE or other opportunities like that you explore as a company.
Yeah, I mean, so we spent a lot of time looking at those things and start with the numbers. How does the demographics of that sponsorship overlay with the demographics of our target customer base? And what is the cost of that sponsorship versus alternatives? And then the second part is around how we can activate it in the local markets. For us, that becomes really, really important for us because I believe that getting into the local communities is a big part of what we do. And then third is really about brand fit. And so WWE is one that I talked about, and it's been a great fit. There's another one that we just recently announced that is a great fit for us, and it's called the Color Run. Have you ever seen the Color Run? You know what this is? Again, completely silly thing. It's a 5K run where you start the run with a white t-shirt, and then they throw these tempera paints at you as you run. Everybody laughs so hard during the course of this, and they have a great time. And so we've sponsored the Color Run. Now, what does that have to do with prepaid service? Absolutely nothing. But once again, it was this idea of the cost of the sponsorship, the fact that these color runs take place all over the country, and so our local markets can get engaged with that type of a sponsorship, and then a fit with the brand that just felt right, and we decided to go do that one.
So I have to give him accolades. He just finished the Boston Marathon, so that's pretty cool.
Thank you.
Another question here.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about innovation in your space and who you could see come in and disrupt you. Talked a little about your innovation centers down at Georgia Tech, but wonder if you could just elaborate on that.
Yeah, so innovation is really, really important for us, and I think we've been through an interesting journey in thinking about innovation as a company. And what I mean by that is that innovation is something that you need to be very intentional in shepherding, because when you're going to create innovation, the inside of a big company, the return on innovation tends to be fairly low in the short term, and the success rate tends to be fairly low, but you need to be willing to take risks and innovate. And inside of our organization, our culture historically has been one where when things don't go well, a lot of people want to understand why, and it gets very uncomfortable. And our chairman actually has a really interesting way that he talks about this, because there are a lot of companies that talk about, in order to have innovation, you've got to create a culture where you celebrate failures. And the way that he talks about it is different from that, and I actually really like it. Is we're not going to celebrate failures, but what we're going to do is we're going to acknowledge someone's willingness to take a risk, and we're going to learn from the failures. And if someone has a track record over the course of their career where they've got a bunch of failures and a bunch of successes, in an aggregate they're creating value, they do really, really well. If there's someone who never takes a risk and never fails, they're going to do okay in the business, but there's a certain kind of a job for that type of a person that isn't, that they're not going to be out leading, they're going to be out doing. And so I really like that idea, which is we encourage people to take risks, They need to be able to defend the reason that they're taking that risk, and then they need to own up to the consequences if it doesn't work out. And by own up, it doesn't mean that someone gets fired, but it means that you quickly say, hey, this didn't work. We invested X amount of dollars in something, and I thought this was going to happen, and it didn't happen. So now let's kill it. Let's change direction. Let's do whatever we're doing. Specifically with innovation, we've got a couple of centers here in Georgia. We've got a drive studio that's all about the connected car down in Midtown, and then we've got something called a foundry, which is where we bring partners together to collaborate. And what we find is we get our best innovation when we bring outside partners in to work with us and come up with new ideas and frankly take some of the risk with us. And that works really well for us. The Chick-fil-A Innovation Center, I was fascinated to be out there a couple of years ago and visit that. And I think what you guys do is really neat. Because, it's one of those areas that you'd think about. They're chicken sandwiches. You go, how much innovation is in there? The innovation that went to creating the grill for the chicken sandwich that rolled out about 2 years ago it's got about, I'm making this up, it's something like 20 patents on it. It took years to develop this thing, and it's a grill that sits inside of a restaurant that you use to create the grilled chicken that gives it the flavor of an outdoor grill. That's innovation that I was just fascinated by, and seeing how you guys actually do that, I learned something from that. You guys also do a phenomenal job with bringing innovation from the front lines up. And so do you guys know about daddy-daughter date night? You guys seen that? Inside of Chick-fil-A, I think it's Tuesdays, is daddy, okay, several times during the year. And this started with a local operator inside of a Chick-fil-A that it was one of the slow nights, and said, I'm going to promote inside the community that dads should bring their daughters into a Chick-fil-A, and they put white tablecloths and candles out, and you have a date with your daughter. What a neat idea. Very, great fit with the Chick-fil-A culture, focus on family and community, and all of a sudden started selling a lot more chicken sandwiches in those stores. And then that idea became innovation that happened at the front lines from one clever person who got recognized for what they did, started to go viral across the Chick-fil-A nationally, and now it's something that you see all over the country. And so I think that's just a really neat idea. It's not about writing code or things like that. It's one, after the fact, seems like a really obvious idea that somebody had the courage to go figure out, and then you figure as a company out how to make that something that's able to disseminate broadly. I talked more about your innovation than ours. So.
John, I got kind of a complicated one for you here, a little bit of strategy, but
yeah.
You mentioned you're marketing to millennials currently with Cricket. How are you going to go about, as millennials become the next working class, how are you going to go about not cannibalizing business from AT&T at a lower price point, therefore reducing revenue as a whole?
Yeah, so number one, we watch it very closely. Two, we've got very distinctly different brands. Like the brand persona is very different. And so there's a term that we've used in various groups that I've been in, which is keep the cannibal in the family. Yeah, I know. I mean, the more you think about it, the more weird that becomes. But this idea of knowing that if there's a market opportunity, if there's a white space out there, someone's going to take it. Much better for us to take it than to just leave it there for one of our competitors to take it. The second part is we watch it closely, where we build our stores, how we promote, how our offers work, and then we look at the number of customers that move back and forth between the Cricket brand and the AT&T brand. And if those numbers start to get out of whack, then we'll take corrective action. It has not been a problem so far. And we don't hide the fact that Cricket is part of AT&T, but we also don't promote it. Very similarly, I talked about Ritz-Carlton. I mean, Ritz-Carlton is part of the Marriott family. When you go into a Ritz-Carlton, you never see a Marriott logo anywhere. Doesn't mean that if you ask somebody inside of a Ritz-Carlton, are you really part of Marriott? They'd go, oh yeah, sure we are. It's great. It's a good thing for us. It allows us to buy bed sheets at a much lower cost than we would buy bed sheets if we were just Marriott by ourselves. Pick real estate in a very different way. They do a whole bunch of things, and so we think about it in a very similar way. Seattle's best coffee is owned by Starbucks. You know, most people don't know that, but if you think about the benefit they get from procurement of beans, roasting, logistics, sales through grocery stores, you know, they get a lot of benefit out of that. They operate as two completely different brands. Do they cannibalize from each other? Probably some. But Seattle's Best Coffee's identity is not about the place. Starbucks, a big part of their identity is this idea of the third place, the Starbucks itself in the community where people go and socialize.
Hey, John, I'd like for you to speak on mentoring, specifically 3 things. From your experience on the mentor or mentee side, how do you find the best relationships originate? How do you foster the relationship, and what's the best frequency for keeping it going?
Yeah, so I'm not a huge fan of formal mentor relationships. I just find that they, in my experience, they don't tend to yield the same results as informal relationships. And for an informal mentor relationship to work, it almost always has to be some type of a two-way street. And I appreciate when somebody comes to me and they've gone the extra mile to kind of figure out how they're going to make this work. They don't put the onus on me. Now, I've had these mentor sessions where somebody comes in and they just sort of plop down in my office and they go, yeah, I was just kind of wondering, can you tell me how you got where you got and maybe any advice you got? You know.
Walked down the hall, came up the elevator.
Yeah, and you get those and you'll humor the person for about 30 minutes, but that relationship isn't going to go anywhere. The ones for me that are a lot more interesting is when somebody comes in and says, hey, your time is valuable. I've got a couple questions that I want to ask you that have been rattling around my head, and given what I know about your background, I think you're sort of uniquely positioned to help me with this. Now, what does that show? Number one, it shows the respect for my time. Number two, it shows some planning and some thought. And literally to do this, if you spent 10 minutes and put any one of your names, anybody else's name in here and Googled it, you could find out 3 things about the person: what their hometown was, where they went to college, what their last job was. That gives you enough information to walk into a meeting and demonstrate some level of actual commitment to the meeting. What's different, when somebody comes and sits down and says, oh, I heard you're the president of Cricket, tell me about that. You go, I mean, while you're sitting in the waiting area in front of my office, you could pull your smartphone out and Google John Dwyer Cricket and find out 10 things about me, and then you know how to start the conversation in a different way. And for me, it's not because I want someone to stroke my ego or anything like that. It's a sign that they're organized, that they're committed, that they're doing the right things, and that they're probably someone who understands what it means to be successful. Because that exact same approach is the approach that I use every time that I get a new assignment. Or if I'm going to go have a meeting with anybody, I go Google them. And this idea, you look on LinkedIn, you go, so I just saw that you ran the Boston Marathon. That's pretty cool. How'd you get into that? You totally change the way that the conversation starts. Now, quickly you'll get to what you want to accomplish in that. But I look for people who go the extra step, because going the extra step when you're mentoring somebody is the sign that they are going to go the extra step when you go sponsor them for an interview, or you give them advice, or whatever the task is that they're trying to get accomplished.
He really is into the details. Questions? Any other questions? Well, you can ask another question. We'll take
There's
another.
been a lot of articles on what T-Mobile's doing and their CEO's approach to taking on the industry. I was wondering if you had any thoughts about T-Mobile specifically.
Yeah, I mean, they're certainly an important competitor that we look at, especially at Cricket, because they are very focused on value. And at the core, there's been a lot of press about them, but what they've done is they've done a lot of things to drive their price down and value to the customers. And I think they've done a good job of sort of packaging that into in the way that they promote it. At the core of the the issue, I feel very good about AT&T's assets and the opportunity that we have over the long term between the spectrum position we have, the network we have, the balance sheet that we have that allows us to continue to invest. And so over the long term, I like our chances relative to, frankly, anybody in the marketplace. And that's really what we're focused on. But yeah, over the last 2-3 years, they've been, a force in the market, and, someone that we're watching closely.
Any other questions? We'll take one last one, and then we'll let John get back to his
Morning, John.
details.
I noticed that you mentioned Jack Welch a couple of times, and he's got a great set of books out there. You also mentioned Big Hairy Goals, so I'm assuming you've read Jim Collins. What 1 or 2 books would you recommend for aspiring leaders, and what are you currently reading?
Yeah, so actually I'm reading a book right now by Thomas Friedman called Thanks for Being Late. And it is a fascinating book about, so he's a New York Times columnist, and it's a fascinating book about all the forces that we're dealing with right now, from climate change to Moore's Law to sort of economic transformation of the world and the implications of that. And it's just, it really is fascinating, and it's one that I would highly encourage you guys to read, because it really starts to help you think about how learning changes. There's a whole section in there that actually features a few pages about AT&T. It was the reason I picked it up at first, about learning and how learning is changing, and what it takes to go reinvent yourself, and how some of the things that in traditional learning and classroom learning is evolving very quickly, but frankly is not evolving quickly enough because the marketplace is evolving so much more quickly. And I just think, especially for those of you that are in business school today, it's worth reading that and thinking about what that means for you in terms of how you transform yourself. And Friedman he's a fascinating guy. I just finished a book called Sapiens, which it's on the bestseller list, and it's about the history of the world. And once again, this one gets a lot into climate change and the impact that humans are having on the world and technology is having on the world. And I think that's also a really fascinating, just sort of a macro book. On leadership, I think Good to Great is one that I think is a terrific book. There's another book by a guy named Nate Silver called The Signal and the Noise, which, if you're a numbers guy like I am, is a really fascinating story about data. And as big data becomes more and more prevalent, instead of us doing a better job at getting to the right answers and truth, you're seeing the opposite. And what the implications are as a leader in this business and for our economy over time. And so I think that's a book that I'd recommend as well.
So if y'all would join me in saying thanks to John for being here today.
Thank you, Nancy. Appreciate it.
And John does post every month his business insights if you want to follow him on LinkedIn. So please look for that and follow him. And before you leave, we have a sculpture that we would like to give you. It is from our own very own, Loretta Eby, but it is for you from us to say thank you for being here today. So
thank you so much. It's beautiful. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next month.